Next week, we will have Rabbi Merrill Shapiro coming to talk to us about the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The week after that, we will have Mr. Peterson talking about climate change. Then on 8/23, we will have Sarah Henry from the Child Friendly Faith Project to talk with us about ensuring children are not hurt by religion. Our speaker today is Serah Blaine from the Foundation Beyond Belief. Sarah is a mom, as we just heard, an activist, and a humanist communications expert. I'm not sure quite what that means, but that's okay. She is the communications director for the Foundation Beyond Belief. And she's dedicated her career to advancing social justice through public policy and grassroots community organizing. So we welcome you to our meeting, and I'm sorry, got distracted by admit. And I'm going to turn the stage over to you in just a second. Oh, and I forgot to say that Sarah will take questions at the end of her presentation. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I prefer it that way. I get easily off track.
I understand.
We'll see. Hopefully the slides will work out. I used to be scared of doing them because I always see, technical failures. But last time I did without slides, I actually spilled on my paper script, and then it's an old-fashioned technology fail. But so thank you very much for having me. Like I said, I'm in Florida now, so it's cool to be speaking to a Florida group, and I'm looking forward to getting to know folks more as the pandemic wanes at some point in the future. As Judy said, my name is Serah Blaine. I have been working professionally in the atheist and humanist movement for, I guess it's been 10 years now, starting with my job as a full-time lobbyist for the secular community in Arizona. Since then, I've worked on over 20 political campaigns, writing humanist positions and platforms for secular candidates with my humanist communications firm. It's called Spectrum Experience. I was a co-host and producer for the Humanist Experience podcast, and most recently have been brought on as the communications director at Foundation Beyond Belief, where we pretty much eat, sleep, and breathe humanist ethics and work to amplify the impact that humanists have in building a more compassionate, equitable, and inclusive world. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about humanist ethics and values and how we apply them in our lives. So I'm grateful to have any opportunity to talk about something that I'm so passionate about and try and spend my career on. So let's start with the basics. And of course, a lot of this is very straightforward for people who have spent any time thinking about ethics and atheism and humanism, but I want to focus on the practical and applied aspect of ethics. So we'll just boil this right down to its core, which is, ethics is essentially a question of what we do, right? It's the question of how we are to behave, how we are to act. Do we take the red pill or the blue pill? And these are questions that we ask all the time throughout the day, throughout our lives, from should I shop at Amazon or bookshop.org? Should I tip my bad waiter? Should I take paper or plastic? Can I lie to my mom about how bad her new haircut is? And then, of course, weightier questions like, is it wrong to eat the flesh of sentient non-humans? Which risks are necessary for us to take during a pandemic? Can war be justified? Should we take mom off life support? And so on. And I'm going to be talking about ethics in terms of practical humanism. So we'll look a little bit at humanism, and I'm sure a lot of you have been really familiar with humanism over the years, and especially the American Humanist Association puts out, the manifesto that's got a lot of good details that I'm sure you're all familiar with. But there are actually many, many kinds of humanism There are many ways of thinking and being in the world for which humanism can be the heart. There's radical humanism, there's humanistic Judaism, there's entrepreneurial humanism, which is a whole other talk. There's political humanism. There's a lot of European humanism, and there's liberation humanism, which is exciting. That's kind of a newer discipline that's gaining some traction right now during the racial justice movement. So there are many beautiful and sound ways of doing humanism, but for me, the most important thing is that we do it, that we not only think academically about humanism, but that we bring it with us into our world as we interact with it. So humanism has a lot of room for diversity and personalization. And on this slide here, you can see a working definition of humanism from a collective in Phoenix that I've worked with. But the common bond between all humanisms is that they represent a progressive, naturalistic, human-centered ethical life stance dedicated to the greater good of humanity. So answers to the question, how are we to act, should be answered based on a naturalistic understanding of reality and should be centered in the wants, needs, and values that exist because we are human. The piece of humanism that I want to focus on the most is the idea that, in fact, humanism is a practice, and doing humanism, practicing its ethics, is key. So I'm not going to get super into the academic or theoretical aspects, but I'm going to talk about the process of practical humanism and its importance. Practical humanism is a practice that we apply in our everyday lives, like math or the scientific method, for example. It's something we bring into the world as we engage with it. It becomes something that we do. And of course, the urgency of a naturalistic, human-centered ethical life stance as a practice is somewhat obvious right now, right? We live in a world where our rejection of reason as a species threatens our very existence. Without it, we can't use the tools of science and reason to solve the massive challenges we're facing right now in terms of environmental catastrophe, systemic racism, emerging diseases, poverty. We seem to be trapped in this perpetual state of war and societal unrest because we cling to racism and nationalism and classism, and these things can't be undermined without empathy and compassion. So we need to apply the very humanist idea that by virtue of being human, we all share a basic set of needs and aspirations. We all share the same capacity for anger, hunger, hatred, love, and joy. And the values of humanism belong to the higher ground and can provide a resonant response to these existential threats, but that means we have to do them. So this talk isn't really intended to just inform you about humanism and ethics, but to inspire and persuade you to practice humanism and be change makers. So, practical humanism. So the minimum conception of practical humanism is rare. It's relevant, it's applied, it's rational, and it's empathetic. So with relevance, the fundamental principle behind all variety of humanism, again, is that ethics are naturalistic and human-centered. And now that doesn't mean that humans are the most important object of our moral concern, but that our need for ethics to begin with comes from the fact that we exist as humans with the wants, needs, and values associated with our humanness. So if humanism isn't concerned with the needs, wants, and values of the people in the current time and place, it doesn't work. It has to be ready to take on new moral challenges as they emerge, as we learn more, as our technology changes, and it can't cling to mores. And of course, very conservative religious traditions struggle with this all the time because the Bible doesn't address things like stem cell research or artificial intelligence. Their foundational moral laws don't change, but humanism can. In the second wave of American feminism, for example, humanists participated in asking questions like, does gender matter? Should difference of gender equate to different sets of rights and responsibilities? And we didn't have to resist those questions out of a reverence for tradition or societal mores, although of course many of us did. But we could look at what we'd learned about neurology, psychology, human development, rights and responsibilities and capabilities, And we updated our social ethics to align with an improved understanding of reality and what human wants, needs, and values looked like in 1970s American society. Humanism stayed relevant and participated in second wave feminism. In this new millennium, humanists can ask, does gender even exist at all? How different are biological sex and socially constructed gender? And how is constructed gender relevant to ethics or law? And we're able to look at what we're learning about neurology and social conditioning and human development. And we're beginning to talk about how we need to update our social ethics and legal protections for transgender and non-binary people. Humanism is staying relevant. And I want to emphasize that practicing ethics in humanism and committing to relevance means that we cannot stay quiet merely for the sake of cohesion. We can't be discouraged by conflict because upheaval is entailed in progress and innovation. So we have to view conflict as a tool for progress. When we back away from taking a stand on the most relevant moral issues of our time, because we're afraid of controversy, or we don't think humanism has a position, we're really failing at humanism, right? Like, where do these positions come from? We're not waiting for revelation when we're practicing humanism. We're creating naturalistic human-centered ethics. So where humanism doesn't have a position on relevant moral issues, we get to come up with one. We get to collaboratively wrestle through the process of figuring out how humanism is going to stay relevant. So we need to have a position, for example, on Black Lives Matter and Black liberation, even when it challenges us to confront our privilege and makes us uncomfortable or defensive, or we don't know what we're doing or where we're heading. We need to take a position on things like guns, even when that challenges us to confront what makes us feel safe and free, and what actually makes us safe and free. If we don't have a position on guns, if we don't have a position on Black Lives Matter because it's too controversial or because not all humanists agree, we're failing to stay relevant. We're failing to use conflict as a tool for progress. And we're not applying humanism where it's most needed. Humanism didn't wake up one morning and decide, for example, to support abortion rights. Humanists had to ask some questions about that. We had to argue with each other. We had to confront our questions and be uncomfortable. And now there's no question about whether or not humanism has something to say about women's right to reproductive health care. Now, the American Humanist Association's first official position on abortion came in 1977, which was 4 years after Roe versus Wade, so they were a little late to the party, but it was still another 17 years before there was enough political will in the country to pass the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. So that was a lot of years of controversy and barricades where AHA was on the higher ground as an outlier. And of course, reproductive health care is still controversial. It's still something humanists argue about and have to think about and challenge our biases around, especially as medicine advances and creates all these new uncharted possibilities in reproduction for people who had been biologically excluded from this right before. The ethical questions change all the time. So it's an issue we have to continue to update our knowledge and emotions about, to refine our position on, and it's an ethical stance humanists have been committed to take even though it's divisive, in part because it's divisive, right? It divides the human family. So as humanists, we work hard through conflict and controversy to overcome status quo bias and keep our ethics relevant. So I am really concerned about armchair humanism because I feel like it undermines itself. Humanism really centrally affirms the dignity and worth of all human life, but we can't affirm the dignity of human beings when we fail to respond to their needs. Humanism is a way, again, of actively engaging with people in the world, not just thinking. And humanists tend to do a lot of thinking, but because of the urgency of the crises facing our species, we can't stop doing the essential applied work that ensures our continued existence in order to luxuriate in pondering these questions, which is not to say that we shouldn't ask them, that we shouldn't even enjoy asking them just for the sake of asking them, but to suppose that we're being humanist and doing humanism if we choose not to respond actively when the most vulnerable among us are denied the most basic human rights, if we suppose that the minimum conceptions of practicing humanism are met when we theorize about racial inequality and economic stratification, while setting aside the immediate needs of people experiencing homelessness, sexual violence, police brutality, that's wrong. It's antithetical to humanism. We have to apply it even as we're theorizing about it. Our world is crying out for an applied humanism, so we need to bring it with us into our workplace, our neighborhoods, our relationships. We need to do humanism. So practical humanism is rational. And I think this is the piece of the humanist and atheist movement that we're best at in 2020. We highly value the scientific method. We strive to overcome ideology and superstition with reason. Most of us understand that unchecked, uneducated emotions lead to dangerous zealotries that we find in religion, nationalism, white supremacy, etc. It's not hard to see that in our politics, our relationships, our philosophies, we need sound reasons for our arguments. We shouldn't, for example, deny people human rights based on arbitrary differences like skin color, gender identity, gender expression. We can use reason to uncover and confront our biases, to bravely know the truth about our universe, and to make decisions based in reality as we uncover it. This allows us an opportunity to determine where our personal impressions are mistaken. Practicing humanism means endeavoring to thoughtfully avoid the unverified opinions and irrational prejudices that thwart our common pursuit of happiness. When I first started talking and writing about humanism, I would refer to the rational and empathetic as the head and heart of humanism. But I actually think that was a mistake. The heart really just pumps blood, and while I understand that using the heart to refer to empathy is just a metaphor, I think it might be a bad one, because the heart is an unthinking organ outside of the head. This metaphor subordinates empathy to reason by implying that they live in separate houses, that empathy is a feeling without cognitive content, and that reason, in contrast, is the thing we do with our cognitive minds. That's not an accurate representation. Empathy and compassion do have cognitive content. In fact, empathizing is the cognitive process of creatively reconstructing someone else's experience. It's a way of providing context to rational facts that we might otherwise fail to understand fully. And the feelings empathy and compassion evoke inspire us to act. And this world needs us to act more. We also need to be cautious not to elevate empathy above reason, because poorly informed empathy can do a lot of damage. The reason and empathy are mutually dependent. So I've decided a better metaphor would be the goby fish and pistol shrimp of humanism. So pistol shrimp burrow in reef edges where they don't have good cover from predators, and they're completely blind. So these vulnerabilities have led to this symbiotic partnership with the goby fish. So the shrimp, like cool, steady reason, maintains the structure where both the shrimp and goby have their nest. The goby fish acts as the eyes for the pistol shrimp, hovering above the burrow, feeding and interacting with other fish. Meanwhile, the shrimp uses its antenna to constantly stay in contact with the goby fish's tail while searching for food and maintaining the nest. So if a predatory fish approaches, like our emotions disruptively alerting us to moral danger, the goby flicks its tail several times so the shrimp knows to retreat into its burrow. And during the night, the two simply rest together in their shared home. Empathy and reason protect, inform, and maintain one another very similarly, and each is very vulnerable without its partner. So that, in a nutshell, is the ethics of practical humanism. It is relevant, it's applied, it's rational, and it is empathetic. And as I wrap up now with a little bit about Foundation Beyond Belief, I want to reemphasize that humanism is a way of engaging with the world, not just thinking about it. It's a way of participating, a way of being with other people. It is an intelligent, sensitive, compassionate, and involved life stance. It is a pursuit, not just a hope, for shared well-being. Foundation Beyond Belief was founded a little over 10 years ago as part of that pursuit to bring humanism into the world. Our mission centers around empowering marginalized people in the United States and around the world in ways that exemplify humanist values. Right now we're doing that through 4 programs, but stay tuned because we are about to launch a revamped mission statement in August, and we'll be unrolling several new programs as we move into the new year. The Humanist Grants is our oldest program, beginning with our founding in 2009. It was designed to connect humanist to secular giving opportunities. This past year, we were able to give about $112,000 to beneficiary organizations, and these are all secular organizations. They've been thoroughly vetted to ensure that they're effective, that they're reaching people who need them the most. Some of the organizations that we gave to this year worked on getting resources to families needing legal services at the border, to minority students studying STEM fields, and South African students affected by apartheid, and many more, but all in these 4 areas that you see on the slide here. We also are doing disaster recovery work. So we launch emergency fundraising drives in response to major natural disasters and humanitarian crises. And we've done volunteer deployments. This photo here is from Puerto Rico. We had a secular spring break where we sent students, and then another week sent a group of adults. And we've actually launched in Florida as well in response to a hurricane. And of course, we ensure that resources are getting to communities affected by disasters without any religious strings attached to beneficiaries. Right now, we are responding to the ongoing racial justice crisis with a fundraiser for an organization that's working on police reform. They're responding to COVID in underserved communities and getting out the vote in minority areas. So you can learn more about that and contribute on our website, which is foundationbeyondbelief.org. Humanist Action Ghana actually started as a service program a few years ago for folks to volunteer their time abroad for a year, but it's evolved into a permanent program with a growing Ghanaian staff. And we have 2 Ghanaian staff members right now. And we are supporting a vocational training program that teaches women skills for becoming tailors. And actually, I think we have 1 man in that program as well, so mostly women, but and then we have this photo here is from a school for kids with intellectual disabilities, and there are a lot of stigmas about disability in Ghana. Of course, we have that issue in the US too, but it's much more serious there. So we're really proud of that program. It's creating some really tangible long-term success. And in the case of the vocational training program, an investment of $500 basically ensures a woman's economic independence for her entire life. So it's a really, really successful program. And then we have our volunteer network. We work with teams all over the world. This photo here is from our team in the Philippines. They're teaching some kids to read here. We have 6 teams in Florida, and Atheists of Florida is a team also. So that's been really a great program, not only to connect atheists and humanists to service opportunities, but also to raise the visibility of atheists and sort of combat some of the negative misconceptions about our ethics when folks see us out in the communities doing good work. And this here is just a quick snapshot of the contributions humanists have made through FBB since 2009. We've been able to give $3 million to charities. We have 150 volunteer teams and growing. And over this number, actually 165,000 volunteer hours, has gone up quite a bit over the past year. So I'll need to update that one. But so as you're looking for ways to practice more humanism, I hope you'll consider connecting with FBB either through volunteer work or giving. There's a link to our website here where you'll find all kinds of opportunities to act. We're also getting more involved in advocacy as well. We've been partnering with the American Humanist Association on some advocacy efforts. A lot of our volunteer teams do blood drives, and there has been a lot of discrimination over the years against gay and transgender blood donors. So we've worked on efforts to help sort of get that ban to follow more scientific guidelines, and that we've made some progress on that over the last year, but it still needs some updating. I think that's everything. I'm trying to think if we're actually in a transition period right now, because we just our executive director just left, so we have our board chair has now taken on the ED role, and we'll be hiring a new ED. So there are a whole bunch of things that are about to happen that I'm about to be able to tell you about, but but they haven't unfurled yet. So but in any case, I would be happy to answer any questions and have a discussion with you about any and all things I've brought up.
Well, thank you so much, Serah. We'll have to have you back once the new programs are announced. Yes. And I apologize for mispronouncing your name. I don't know why I want to call you Serah instead of Serah.
Oh, no, everybody does. Yeah, it's yeah, I'm very used to it. My parents gave us all very difficult names.
Well, it's not difficult. It's just, you see it and you think Serah.
It looks like Serah, yep.
Yeah. So we can open it up to questions for anybody who wants to ask anything. I will get it started with the question about going back to liberation humanism. I honestly have not heard of that before. So if you could enlighten us a little bit, I would appreciate that.
It's really emerging, and I think the American Humanist Association is having some ongoing Zoom talks with different folks that are talking about sort of colonialized humanism and how the current conception of humanism is really Eurocentric, and there are a lot of other philosophies of thought that can contribute to humanism that will help in the liberation movements for people of color that have been widely ignored by the European versions of humanism. So those new ways of thinking about humanism are being articulated by a lot of young Black and Brown humanists. And it's really cool, again, just how humanism is able to update pretty readily in comparison to religious ways of thinking. And it's always exciting to hear the new and emerging ways of thinking. So I highly recommend checking out some of what AHA's speaker series has been coming up with around those.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you. And then I have a question concerning the activism of how are other groups around the country participating in the activism things now with the COVID problem? Because as you can see, most of us are old here.
Yes.
That's what you'll find in Florida a lot, but you have a wonderful group in Orlando area. So you're in a great area to find a lot of activism. Yeah. But how are other groups dealing with keeping up and maintaining activism while in the COVID era?
Yeah, it's definitely been a lot harder, and we have to get really creative about it. I think there's been a lot of great organizing work done in using online technology. There's a lot of good software for doing, email campaigns to various elected officials, and it's also an interesting ethical question for folks who are younger and can consider being physically present at protests. And this is one of the questions that I brought up in my list of ethical quandaries is, what risks can and should we take during a pandemic? And, some of the racial justice emergency probably does require some risk for people. But yeah, Foundation Beyond Belief actually has a page. Let me see if I can find it real quick so I can tell you the web address, but otherwise I can email it to you.
Okay.
Because when we started our week of action this past May, we do a week of action every year, trying to get folks to do volunteer and activism work. That was right as COVID was hitting. And it's like, oh, how do we help teams do this kind of work virtually? So there are a lot of resources on there of ways to do virtual advocacy. And I'm not finding that.
That's okay. If you can really just email it to me, I'll send it to everybody on our list. So.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. And Bill Norsworthy, you have your hand up. You have a question?
I do. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the idea of engagement through conflict and how you, through the foundation, try to live that out.
Yeah, so I think that any progress always requires conflict. It's certainly, we don't ever immediately know how to solve any particular problem, or we don't even always readily know that there is a problem without it being brought up in some kind of conflict process. And I think one of the things that's really cool about humanism is that when that conflict starts, we don't have to fight against it just for the sake of maintaining some traditional, standard, that we can engage with the conflict, because we certainly can. I think it's pretty easy to believe that things certainly are not as good as they could be in any situation. There's always better that we could do. So when we look for moments of conflict, it's kind of a clue that there's an opportunity to start working toward positive change. So I think that we've seen that evolve just in terms of how we've structured our programs, because from the very beginning, Foundation Beyond Belief really wanted its service work to be anti-colonialist internationally. There's a lot of service work is really sort of patronizing and trying to, put our own standards on other countries in ways that are really oppressive. And trying to figure out how do we go over to Ghana and do work there without bringing damaging ideas about how they should be rather than listening to what they should be. So we actually, after several rounds of having volunteers in Ghana, realized that it was more harmful than good for us to continuously send volunteers, that actually what we needed to do was be hiring local Ghanaian people to do that work and create jobs in that community, and that was actually a much more ethical way of using our funds. But it's uncomfortable to recognize that you've been doing it the wrong way, and it's always sad to see a program that has been really rewarding for people. I know that a lot of our volunteers really had very positive experiences doing that. But as we were seeing the conflicts that were happening between the volunteers and the local community, we were able to move forward and find a better way to operate. So, and I know for myself, the process of debating is so enriching. I learned so much through arguments, and I think that we a lot of times get scared of having arguments, especially at work. You don't want to upset people that you're working with, but But I think there's so much opportunity in debate and conflict to learn and grow.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Judy.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Anybody else have a question? Mr. Peterson, I can't believe you are not questioning this. Where did he go? Did he leave? No, he must have got
stormed
kicked
out. That's right.
No. Jim Young, you have the floor.
Okay, I'm glad that the topic of ethics is on the table, especially with respect to humanism and activism. I am an activist, and while I don't talk that much about humanism, I simply represent myself as a humanist and an atheist. And most of my activism is confined to posting messages on below videos on YouTube. My intent is to attract the attention of religious individuals to engage me in debate or conversation. Most of the time, the individuals are going to be religious fanatics because the more liberal a person is religiously, the less likely they even care about defending religion or attacking atheists. So, but one of the advantages and tactical advantages that I use is to confront theists over the lack of ethics, because the more religious they are, and this is an observation, the more religious they are, the less ethical they are, because they abuse people who are different. They are intolerant, and they attack, try to disparage, vilify, and ostracize anyone who has a difference of opinion or different perspective, worldview. And so it gives me an opportunity as an atheist and a humanist to challenge their behavior from a moral, ethical position. And I usually confront them about their behavior, because they usually attack me with ad hominems and accuse me of every evil thing that can be imaginable without any evidence at all. But it's because we know they don't have an answer to this issue, so they attack the messenger. So what I try to do is I will essentially respond to their attacks by accusing them of being severely lacking in morality and ethical ideals. And the one I like to throw at them is what I will call a universal ethic, that we should not subject others who are different to malevolent treatment that we ourselves would not like to be subjected to. And they will, of course, dismiss that and ignore that, but then I can challenge them by saying, well, how would your Jesus feel about this standard, this moral, ethical standard? Would he ignore it or dismiss it out of hand the way that you are doing? And it does tend to have a mitigating effect upon their attitude, because they realize that I have the moral high ground. And that is something that is very uncomfortable for them. Sometimes we can actually have a somewhat intelligent conversation, although I I converse with them, not that I think that I'm going to change their mind about anything. I argue solely for the reason that I'm hoping that there will be other observers to the conversation,
Yeah.
who will have some objectivity and will learn something. But anyway, that's something I wanted to say, because I really believe it's extremely important for atheists and humanists to behave in a moral, ethical manner, especially when they're engaging members of the theist community who are so intolerant. That's all I have.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I mean, I think YouTube and you know, online platforms are really great tools for activism. And as you say, a lot of times when we're engaging on a fundamentalist of any issue, and I know that this has been true in my work on LGBT equality issues, you know, I argue with fundamentalists on that issue, not because I'm going to make any headway, but because I know that LGBTQ teens are on the internet, and I don't want those kinds of attitudes to go unchallenged. And so, you know, having young people see the way that we interact and put forth a humanist ethic is making a lot of change in the younger generations. And I think that's part of the reason that we've seen such a huge growth in secularism among young people, is because of the internet engagement.
Jim Peterson, you need to put up your blue hand, but go ahead.
I don't have a blue hand, as you know. I'm a.
Oh, that's right. You're a co-host. Sorry.
I've been caught red-handed. Anyway, Serah, you did mention a certain movement toward the non-European traditions of humanistic philosophy. And as we know, the humanist tradition of the West has been slowly developing over many, many centuries. And so I am naturally curious about what you mean by non-European humanistic philosophy. I assume something like Buddhism, perhaps. There's some sort of traditional connection there, but I don't know. I realize it's a long conversation, but
it is. Well, and I'm not at all an expert on it, because it's such an emerging you know, way of articulating humanism. I know that I encountered some of it in I grew up in a very liberal religious household, and my dad was very interested in liberation movements in Latin America, and there's a lot of Catholic liberation theology that that also had secular counterparts in Latin America. And we don't call that humanism when we read it here, but it really is. And so having young people of color now sort of connecting with those movements and finding ways of articulating humanism in a new language here is going to be really interesting. And as you say, you know, European humanism has evolved very, very slowly over a long period of time. And this articulation of humanism is much newer, although I think there are roots that are much, much older that we just aren't as familiar with. And one of the really cool things, again, about online technology, access to translations of works from all over the world have become much, much easier to find. And so we're discovering humanist thought in areas that we wouldn't have known about because we didn't read those languages. So there's all kinds of new ideas that are emerging as a result of that.
Thank you very much. I remain very interested in the subject.
Yes.
We'll see. Now, don't everybody speak up at once.
Exactly. If nobody's going to talk, I will talk. I'm curious as to how atheist groups react to your talk about, not, as we know, not all atheists are humanists. not all humanists are atheists. And while we are an atheist group, the majority of our members, our active members, are humanists. We have had some people object to our taking humanist stance. But I'm just curious as to how atheist groups are reacting to this kind of activism.
So I think that most atheist groups that I've encountered have such a huge contingency of humanism within the group that it's very, we're very aligned. But there are definitely some that are either more conservative socially or just feel that atheism should have a very narrow focus on atheist advocacy and church-state separation. So I've definitely seen some pushback from individuals, but not as much from atheist groups as a whole. And certainly, I mean, atheist groups that are in opposition to that kind of humanist activism typically don't invite me or Foundation Beyond Belief to speak to them. So, but online, I do run into it. I do run into it online.
We also had, Mr. O'Keefe started a discussion with us this morning concerning Hema Mehta's article today, I think it was today or yesterday, about an author from CFI who is well, he was a Republican to begin with, but now he is going into what I would consider right-wing extremism and bordering on white nationalism, although that's probably a bit of a stretch on reading his thing today. But there is Richard Spencer, who is identified in the community atheist, in the broader community by the media and stuff. What kind of actions is being planned to counter those kinds of irrational thoughts and information being put out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing that we can do is put forward and center the activists that are countering. I mean, there's so much good messaging and so many great speakers that are really, really knowledgeable and charismatic on those issues, and they're not getting as much airtime as the sort of angry traditional conservative voices that we've had in the atheist movement a bit. So even just, with groups like yours requesting speakers that are newer and emerging with some of these, this really exciting messaging that counters those, I think that really helps increase their visibility. And then we'll see more blog articles, more videos, more hopefully published books as well.
Okay. Any other questions or issues, people? Bill Northworthy? Whoops. Sorry, I accident. We keep stepping on each other. I will leave it to you.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Could you go back to that Eurocentric issue, and how are you anticipating, from your point of view, what does the future look like on that particular issue of redefining humanism to get away from a Eurocentric model? And I understand talking to people in their environment and listening to them is very important, but I mean, is somebody saying that the Eurocentric humanistic model is wrong? It's a bad model?
So I think that what's being said is that it's not diverse, and that we can have an even more full humanism when we include these other ideas that we haven't. I mean, I've been exposed to ideas that I hadn't even thought of before. So like, it's really cool to be exposed to new ways of thinking and have just a more fuller And again, I think it's sort of similar to the example of how the Bible doesn't really address things like stem cell research and artificial intelligence. There are things that European humanism doesn't address because we don't have the information to address it. And so as we include these other voices from other places with other histories and philosophies, you know, it'll be a more full, diverse ethic that's able to better handle the challenges that we're going to face, you know, in the coming decades.
Are there some examples of that you could point to?
I think that the racial justice emergency that we're experiencing right now is a good example, just because the humanist movement has been struggling to see the relevance to humanism of institutional racism, and it's readily apparent to people experiencing it. And so as we do a better job of including those voices, we'll have better ways of responding to these issues. So yeah, I mean, I really think that it's just, it's going to be something to pay attention to and to be excited about. You know, I'm always looking forward to change and growth. And I don't think that the suggestion is that we overhaul European humanism, but you know, European humanism was in place and was operating during times when it probably should have had something to say on issues that it didn't take a stand on. And when we look at why that might be, it's primarily because it was too homogenous. And so as we add new voices, we won't have as many of those ethical pitfalls in the future.
Did that answer your question, Bill?
I think more or less.
And I'd love to come back or bring somebody back at some point to have more specific examples, because as I say, you know, this is pretty new for me as well. I don't think that it is a new idea, but we haven't invited or centered minority voices as much in our movement. So now that we're beginning to recognize that we need to do that, we're learning a lot. And I've been exposed to a lot of exciting ideas that I'm looking forward to reading up on and becoming more knowledgeable about. But I always just want to encourage people to, you know, like, don't have humanism have the same status quo bias pitfalls that we see in religious traditions, because we can learn and grow.
Thank you.
Jim Young.
I wanted to ask about activism and outreach activism, because, well, I've been a humanist for many years, but I don't think that the movement is living up to its full potential with respect to outreach and activism. There are many ways to reach out and touch the lives of other people that humanists are not doing. They're content to sit in their chair and hope that someone will discover them, rather than taking their message to the people at large.
Yeah.
So my question then to you is, what is your particular organization doing to expand or take advantage of outreach opportunities to get the humanist message out there and to answer challenges or false characterizations that are being propagated about humanism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the volunteer network is a really great tool for that, because when we're able to promote the work of humanists in local communities, when we're able to help them get news coverage for their work, that really helps bring awareness. And we're going to be doing a lot more marketing too in the coming year. The social media tools for targeting audiences have gotten so good in the last few years that it's, you know, based on people's interests in their online behavior, we can deliver ads to them so that they'll, you know, if somebody spent a lot of time looking up humanism or atheism or, you know, any topics surrounding those things, we can have ads delivered to them that like, hey, there's a group in your area. So that'll help a lot. And YouTube is really emerging as a tool to reach people. And I think that Foundation Beyond Belief doesn't do as much political work as a C3, but I think that a lot of the political work that's happening in the atheist movement is also really doing a great job of raising visibility. I know that in Arizona, when I first started, when I first started in the movement there, I had moved from Baltimore, Maryland to a small rural town in northern Arizona, and was dealing with a little bit of culture shock. And so I started an atheist group on Meetup, and, you know, hosted a potluck at my house to meet the local atheists. And people were like, I got a ton of messages from folks like, you need to take your address off the internet. You know, you can't be a public atheist here. And so I think that there's been a lot of fear about being open that is less and less the more that we are public. So, and Arizona has been really interesting because it's crazy how many atheist elected officials there are there that are open. And that's happened over the course of the last 10 years because one guy, when Representative Juan Mendez, he's now a state senator, came out as an atheist, actually kind of as an accident. That's another story. And he didn't have any political fallout. And then, you know, bit by bit, other people were like, you know, yeah, we're all secular. It's not a secret anymore. So I think that just elevating stories, doing marketing, you know, having one or two people be brave here and there makes a big difference for people being able to find their atheist communities.
Do you have a channel on YouTube, and do you do any debates?
Foundation Beyond Belief doesn't do debates, and I don't think that we would, because we're much more focused on humanitarian charity work. We do have a YouTube channel. I'm in the process of revamping it because it hasn't been utilized very much, but it's in my marketing plan for the coming year because that's just such a fantastic tool. So, and especially because so much of the charity work that Foundation Beyond Belief does has these really beautiful stories. You know, when people go to the Bahamas and help rebuild and connect with people, I mean, you want to be able to see videos of what's happening there. So, so we'll be definitely doing a lot more to get those up. And again, I think that having really beautiful humanist videos like that show the heart of humanism will also help with the stigma against atheists.
Thank you, Jim. Jim Peterson, I think you kind of looked like you wanted to ask a question.
It did kind of look like that, didn't it? Well, I have a couple of matters here. One of which is an observation that in defense of European humanism, I think that there's some advantage to the fact that it arises over the course of many centuries from Epicurus. It's 3,000 years since Epicurus was on the planet. And in the interim, a lot has developed intellectually that helped to support our modern understanding of what humanism is. And I think that that what is particularly valuable is the tragedy of European humanism in that it existed in places that experienced things like the rise of fascism and Nazism, having to deal with the guilt of the death camps and so forth, and all of the experiences of the 20th century that help to make us, that is the world's people, basically, who we are. And all of that emerged from the development of European philosophy, European influence, colonialism, and everything else that has happened. So we still have to be part of that. And I think we can't really escape it and shouldn't even try.
Yeah, and I definitely am not suggesting that we, boot out thousands of years of, I love humanism. I'm a humanist evangelist. I'm a big fan. But I also think that, how humanism continued to grow through all that time, as you say, having to develop under Holocaust conditions, that really is what made humanism so resilient and able to address future moral concerns. And so we just need to continue that process as we face additional, there are a lot of people in the world still facing Holocaust conditions, and they have humanisms, and we are not as ready to hear those stories. And I think we can be. And not every new idea that's brought to humanism, not every new articulation of humanism is going to be a good one. We're going to hear bad ideas. But again, we have 3,000 years of figuring out how to deal with bad ideas.
As long as there are people, there will be bad ideas.
Yes, and we're not immune to them at all, But I worry that people are scared of new ideas in our movement, and I just think that would be a shame, because there is always room for us to learn more.
We can't get away from new ideas either. But let me raise one other issue that I'm sure will be dear to the heart of Jim Young, and that is that we have recently been through a response by the government to the COVID vaccine, in which large amounts of money were distributed via the PPP program, and a great deal of it, $7 billion, went to churches. And the churches, which are nominally supposed to be out there administering aid, in many cases, to the same situations that the foundation addresses, and yet the foundation only has $2 or $3 million to, in total, to distribute. We humanists are few in number and not that rich, but nevertheless, here are the churches getting the public fund, the public tax support, to go out and simply reinforce their own theology and so forth. I think that's cause for considerable agitation.
Yeah, and there are a number of atheist groups working on that and advocacy around that. And I think actually Americans United for the Separation of Church and State is doing some stuff around that. So it is frustrating. I do actually think that a few of our atheist communities have benefited from that program as well, right? Which I feel good about, that we're at least not being discriminated against in getting that. But yeah, I mean, the problem of religious aid is just an ongoing one, and it's it's definitely a moral problem.
Thank you.
Jim Young.
Back to outreach. Do you have any billboards, or do you have now? Freedom from Religion Foundation has an excellent YouTube channel, and they do some professional broadcasts. So they're getting out there. They're reaching people, and I really can't say enough about how important it is for humanist organizations to have a plan. Do you distribute printed materials? Do you have a way for people to access materials free if they contact you? Do you have a speakers bureau? These are questions that I have about exactly what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm actually jotting down notes here too. So I've been at FBB for a little over a year, and have just gotten to the point where we were able to put together a marketing plan for the coming 3 years. So we have done piecemeal outreach up until this point, but we hadn't had resources to devote to a really comprehensive plan until now. So you will be to revamp our YouTube channel and invest some money in, and again, getting some really high quality materials from our volunteer deployments, from our Ghana program, that we'll be able to share with people. We do support our volunteer networks, and you know, our volunteer networks can apply for grants for doing stuff like that as well. But yes, we definitely, there's a huge untapped opportunity for marketing, and I think that FBB is really uniquely suited to reaching an audience that our other atheist organizations won't reach, just because of their charity and philanthropy focus. So I'm really excited about being able to do more in the coming years with that. And yes, yeah. But we don't have billboards in our plan, but we do definitely feature a lot of YouTube and social media marketing.
One of the things that one of the needs I see, being from a small group, so to speak, is, and since you're a communications person, I think there needs to be more training available to groups like ours on how to communicate effectively. And I know that that's may not be what FBB would do, but if you could steer us in a direction, because that, I think, is one of our big weaknesses, is
yeah, and I actually think that FBB could do that. We certainly have expertise in that area, and you know, I've done a lot of communications and media work. So yeah, I'll check in with Wendy, who runs our volunteer teams, and see, you know, if we can just put, certainly if you contacted us, we would be happy to work with you, but I also think it would be good to put that out there into the, you know, let people know that we can help with those trainings.
That would be great.
And AHA, I know AHA, and I would assume American Atheists also, in fact, I think I gave a talk at American Atheists on communications. So I'm pretty sure in their webinar series, they would have some.
They do. They do. It's just the more input I can get, I think the better off everybody is.
Well, yeah, and having it be personalized for your area too. I know that it was hugely helpful to be able to focus on Arizona specifically, and I got a lot of help when I was working in Arizona from American Atheists on you know, getting in touch with press there and developing a marketing plan for that area, which is better to have than just sort of generic, like, here's some tips on how you do communications.
Yeah. I think a lot of the groups out here in the broader country are reinventing the wheel all the time.
Yes.
And because we're not communicating enough with each other and not sharing our experiences and how to do things. And that's something that I had wanted to work on this next year.
Yeah, and I think this is a great year to do it, just because, you know, in just a handful of months, suddenly millions and millions of people have become tech savvy in a way that was not, you know, and like, you know, I don't know how, I maybe had done one Zoom before COVID, you know, and now everybody is familiar with how to do this. So we're able to collaborate across the country in ways that were just unheard of before. So.
And Eileen put in the chat thing that encourage people to watch Holy Hierarchy. Thank you, Eileen. If you have not seen that movie, or that documentary, I should say, I really strongly recommend it, because it really gives a strong basis for why atheists need to fight racism. And it's just an incredibly, I was a history major in college, and I learned so much from that documentary. It's available on Amazon Prime and on YouTube, I believe. But I just learned so much from that documentary about American history and the basis for racism in the Bible in this country. I just found it quite enlightening.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't even heard of that one, so I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, well, I have to thank Secular Student Alliance for that link, because that's where I learned about it, was from that group. So, you know,
yeah, they're a great one to watch too, because they're, yeah, you know, with being connected with so many young people, it's a new idea factory.
yes, yes.
Love it.
Okay, any other questions or comments anybody wants to make before we allow Serah to Jim Peterson?
Yes, like a
Jim
bad
is my
penny, I'm
husband,
back
in case you
again.
don't know that. So that's why I can harass him.
In your on your website, it alludes to the fact that you have a number of areas that you treat, and one of them is the natural world. And I, as a person who's had a long-standing interest in that, could you tell us anything about what work or what we're doing to address what ultimately could be a life-ending situation?
Yeah, so we give grants every quarter to an organization working on issues in the natural world. So we've given away hundreds of thousands of dollars to those orgs, and we're about to launch a new website. Everything's going to be more organized soon, I promise.
Okay.
Because yeah, I was even when I was trying to sort of put together some points on work that we've done, I'm like, oh, it's not easy to find the organizations that we've given to,
Right.
and a lot of them are just doing really creative and innovative work, and you know, just things that you wouldn't have even heard of. So yeah, so check back in a month on the website, and we'll have better yeah, because one of the cool things about working for FBB is just learning about all of these organizations that I never would have heard of, that are doing really incredible things, and things that can be replicated in other communities if we do a good job of getting the word out about the work that's being done.
How would one go about making a grant proposal to FBB?
There is, let me see. I think that if you just click on grants, I believe it'll navigate you to there. Actually, it's under, so grants, and then the drop-down menu has compassionate impact grant. So that is for organizations that are doing work in any of these 4 areas. If you are looking for a volunteer network grant, that's going to be under the BBN teams.
Yeah, I can show him where that is, since we've been a volunteer network with you for some time, although we haven't done anything lately.
Yeah, and feel free to email me after too if there's stuff you're looking for that you can't find. The website is really not organized in a very, it's just, there's a lot of content, and it's not necessarily easy to find stuff. So we are working on that.
Thank you.
One of the things that we do is collect RSS feeds from various groups with their, we have it on our website, a news summary of all the various national groups. So if you could add an RSS feed to your server, to your blog, to your post, so that we can pull that information and put it on our website, we can get that information out to people a lot easier.
Excellent. Okay, make a note.
Okay, and thank you, Rick, for sharing the link to the documentary, the YouTube link in the chat. So if anybody needs a link to that, I will also be mailing that out. But Rick, you had something you wanted to say?
It turns out that link is only for the teaser, the trailer.
Oh, okay.
YouTube apparently does not have the whole.
Oh, it doesn't have the whole thing. Okay. I hadn't looked at it because we get Amazon Prime, so I had looked at it on there. But I'm sure that there must be some other way to get to it besides Amazon Prime, or at least in the near future there will be. Or we could do a a movie night and share it, because it really is, it's hard to watch. I will tell you that, especially about half hour into it. It's really hard to watch, but it's quite enlightening. All right, thank you so much, Serah, and I will look forward to being in touch with you, and also to having you and whomever you wish to drag into this melee with you back, and looking forward to your revamped website in the near future.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to getting to know you guys better now that I'm in Florida.
And I will let you know when it's up on YouTube. It should be up in the next day or two, because I edit out some things.
Good program.
Great.
What part of Florida are you in?
I'm in Oviedo, outside of Orlando.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so thanks everyone, and thank you, Joe. Glad that you could make it, and Linda. I didn't get a chance to greet you when you came in. So thanks everybody, and we will see you next week for Rabbi Merrill Shapiro. Thank you.
Thank you.